I've been saying for a long time now, many years, going way back, that they were drones. And I'll give you a story in a second, which will show that was planned in 1962. Never mind 2001. But what I was going to say with this thing is that every single plane crash in the world, no matter what it is, they establish that the plane is the one they think it is.
Yeah.
And they do it this way. All plane parts have a serial number. And there are some called time change parts, which are changed regularly. Even if there's nothing wrong with them, they have to be changed. And they all have serial numbers. Mm-hmm. And every time a part is put on a plane, the maintenance log logs the serial number. So what the plane investigators do every time, not when there's an R in the month, every time, is they take the maintenance logs and they look at the parts that have been found, and they say, yep, they match. This is definitely the plane we think it is. That was not done on 9/11 on any of the 4 planes. And someone put in a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI to reveal the documentation to show that that's been done. Mm-hmm. And the FBI came back and said the documentation doesn't exist because it was not done. And they said it wasn't done because the identity of the planes was never in doubt. Now, people that read the book, they'll see that the identity of the planes was massively in doubt. So again, just like the cameras, okay.
What about black boxes, David? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, the black boxes have serial numbers.
Uh-huh. Were they recovered?
Some of them were, some of them weren't. None were recovered from the Twin Towers, so they claim, although some people that were, working in the rubble said they were found.
What about the people who rang? So there was people on the planes who were ringing their relatives. That was one thing I always was confused about.
What happened to those people?
When I try and use my phone on a plane, I can't use it.
Oh, well, depends on the atmosphere. Yeah.
No, but I'm not disputing. This isn't me coming from a conspiracy angle or anything. I just always thought, well, because recently they've apparently brought new technology and it's going to allow us to ring people on a plane. I'm like, well,
that would just be really annoying.
Yeah. But let me pick up that point before it disappears. The stories of the calls from the plane are extremely in doubt, especially when you're looking at the technology of 2001 in terms of cell phones. And this is what happened.
Before 4G.
Everything I'm saying here, by the way, is all supported by factual detail in the book. When the story first broke, the basically FBI media story was that all these kind of phone calls were made from cell phones, from the planes, right? Then it was pointed out, something you just mentioned. Hold on a minute. You can't make cell phone calls from that altitude, right? And so what happened then is the FBI changed the story and started saying, no, they came from seat-back phones known as air phones, which they used to have in those days. I used one on one occasion, about the same time, actually. And they were in the seat backs, and they had a wire on, and you pulled them out, and you used a credit card, and you could call the ground. They're called air phones. They're run by a company called Verizon. And so suddenly these cell phones became air phones. But two things to that. First of all, a lady called Barbara Olson, who was an in-vision contributor to CNN, she was married to the Bush administration Solicitor General called Ted Olson. And the official story is she was on Flight 77, and she made 2 phone calls to her husband at the Justice Department and told him what was going on the plane. It's from those phone calls, alleged phone calls, that the whole idea of the box cutters came from. That's where they came from. Mm-hmm. And the only evidence, if you can call it evidence, that Flight 77 turned around in the Midwest and came back, and it wasn't another plane, was the Olson calls.
Oh, really?
Those Olson calls have no supporting documentation, either at her end or the Justice Department's end, that they were made.
The one other thing, sorry to interrupt you, that to my knowledge, was there any recordings of the paths that the plane took or anything? Is there any proof like that?
I mean, there are recordings of where planes go, aren't
there? But again, it's a long story, but in the book I go through all this background about what was actually going on or could have been going on. But here's the point. The official story was that, first of all, was that Barbara Olson called her husband on a cell phone. And then you look at the flight data recorder, and impossible. So the story changed. And that's what you find with the 9/11 story, which I've been tracking literally since the day it happened. I brought out the first book on it in 2002. When they're caught out, the story changes. So suddenly it became, no, she called on an air phone. That's how she did it.
Right.
Well, as I quote from the American Airlines, because it was an American Airlines 757, Flight 77, as I quote from the American Airlines manual, and from also pilots and cabin staff of the time, the airphones had been taken out of American 757s by the time of 9/11. So there were no freaking airphones they could have used.
Sometimes the telephone calls will be false.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
here's another one. There was a passenger on Flight 93 called Tom Burnett, and he called his wife, and his wife saw his cell phone number come up on her phone. So he's called her on his cell phone. And then, according to the flight data recorder, when he called her, the plane was flying at between 34,000 and 40,000 feet. So the story changed, and in the official explanation, the FBI said he called on an airphone, which was still in United Airlines planes, which 93 was.
Got the call log.
Yeah.
But his cell phone number came up.
Exactly.
Another thing, couple of the callers, one particular guy called Todd Beamer, he was the Let's Roll guy, and there's great doubt about whether he actually said that.
Yeah, it sounds great for a movie type.
Yeah.
Was
Flight
that
93.
on Flight 93?
93.
All right, I'd be interested what you say about this.
He didn't call his wife, although he could have done, because the operator offered to put him through, but he stayed on the line to this operator, a lady called Lisa Jefferson, a Verizon airphone operator, for a long, long time. And she said, first of all, it was absolutely amazing because airphone calls were going down all around me. It was chaos because the connections were breaking down everywhere, but his never broke down. Something else, because she's an airphone expert, works it all the time, she said that when the line breaks, there's a squealing sound, right? Well, that phone connection between her and Todd Beamer, as is claimed, continued long after the plane was supposed to have crashed. And another caller, some parents taking a call from their relative, the same thing happened. The call continued after the plane was supposed to have crashed. And of course, the airphones get their power from the power of the plane. So the plane crashes, it's all down. The other thing, Todd Beamer's cell phone had 19 outgoing calls made on it after that plane was supposed to have crashed. I mean, all over the place, there are these extraordinary things that cannot be explained. And none of it was explored in the 9/11 Commission report because they can't explain it.
So what are we then saying happened to those people that got on those planes? Because they're all real people, aren't they?
Yeah. Let me give you some background to something called Operation Northwoods. And because Operation Northwoods was basically a version of 9/11 in 1962, and then you can see the themes, which includes passengers. In 1962, during the Kennedy assassination, there was a plan made to discredit Castro and Cuba to justify an invasion. Notice the common theme. And it was called Operation Northwoods. And this is not me theorizing and pulling out the ether. I'm quoting now the official American archive. And in the summer of 2001, a former ABC investigative producer called James Bamford came out with a book called Body of Secrets. It was an investigation into the National Security Agency in America, the NSA. And in that research, he came across these documents in the archive, Operation Northwoods. And it was a plan, and in the end, when Kennedy found out about it, apparently he said, "You must be joking," and it wasn't played out, but it was all planned to be played out. And there was a guy who was head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the uniform level of the military in the Pentagon, called Lemnitzer. He was orchestrating it all. And this is what it says in these documents. The plan was to stage terrorist bomb and other attacks in major American cities, New York, Miami, two of those that are named, to have American military forces covertly sink American shipping, and to blame the attacks on Castro and Cuba to justify an invasion of Cuba. Now, this is the big connection to 9/11. One of the things they planned, and it's described in detail in the documents, was that they were going to pick a plane flying a commercial route from an East Coast American airport, whose natural route took it over, at very high altitude, obviously, Cuban airspace. And they were going to put on the plane passengers, and this is a quote from the document, with carefully selected aliases, and the plane was going to fly down across Florida, going down towards Cuba. And when it got into Florida, another plane, the same type, painted in the same airline colors, a drone controlled from the ground, we're talking 1962, what technology did they have in 2001, was going to take off from the Eglin Air Force Base. It was going to go up close to the original plane, so that basically the blips became one. And then the plane that left the airport with the carefully selected alias passengers was going to be landed at Eglin Air Force Base. The drone was going to go on the scheduled route, and it was going to be blown up by radio signal over Cuba. And it even says in the document, and we will wait for the international aviation authorities to tell us what has happened, to obviously keep the idea that we had nothing to do with it. Yeah. So that's what they planned in 1962.